Hey all, Binks here, and today we're talking about tech cards. Tech cards are cards that you're going to be playing against the meta or decks that you're seeing a lot of on the ladder, as opposed to playing all cards that are just meant to improve your own power. These are very powerful cards, and even though they might not add too much to your own side of the location, the results of being able to deny your opponent large amounts of power can never be understated. And I think that learning to both utilize these tech cards and know how to deal with them from your opponent is going to be one of the most important skills that you're going to learn as you're trying to grow in the ladder. The 6 text cards we are going to talk about today: in Pool 1, we're going to be talking about Armor, Cosmo, and Enchantress. And over in Pool 2, you're going to start seeing Leech, Killmonger, and Shang-Chi. We'll deal with how to utilize these cards, what metas you might want to include these cards in your deck, as well as ways to deal with the repercussions of getting hit with these cards, or how to anticipate them from your opponent to try and save as many of your cubes as possible. Let me know in the comments down below what your least favorite tech card is, because when these get played against you, they can really hurt, and what your favorite one is to surprise your opponent. As always, if you're enjoying this content, make sure to like the video. It really helps me out. You can subscribe to the channel for more awesome Marvel Snap content, and you can catch me live either here on YouTube or at twitch.tv/binks_plays. Enjoy. First up, we have Cosmo, our very good boy, who has an ongoing effect of on-reveal abilities won't happen at this location, and a stat line of 3 energy and 3 power. If you've recently just played in the Kamar Taj hot location, you probably saw a ton of this doggo. This card is incredible from the moment you unlock it all the way through Pool 3. Cosmo has a very unique ability as it stops on reveal effects. It's the only card in the game that can do that. So whenever you're facing a lot of on reveal decks in Pool 1, you'll see a lot of White Tigers, Odins, Ironhearts, Wolfsbanes, different things like that. You can definitely throw it on that lane. If you're seeing an Angela lane, a lot of times those cards that get dropped on it are going to have abilities, so that might be a good choice to send it over there. The reason you'd want to include this in your deck is if you don't like getting hit with those on reveal abilities, if you feel like you have a keen eye for knowing where Odin's going to drop on turn 6, really great to do. To utilize this card properly, you need to know how initiative works. Whoever's name is highlighted up the top during the turn is going to reveal their cards first. Cosmo is a card where you absolutely want to be able to reveal before your opponent, because you can then call out that they're going to play an on-reveal ability and they're not going to get the benefit of it. If you play Cosmo first, then opponent can play around it, utilize those on-reveal abilities in the other lanes, but when Cosmo is especially devastating is when you're able to land it on that card. Now on the flip side, if you are doing an on-reveal deck, and let's say you have a Ironheart and a White Tiger in one lane, and you're winning pretty handedly, and your opponent snaps on turn 6, and you're a little confused, you're saying, I'm going to drop Odin here, I'm going to absolutely decimate my opponent. Expect a Cosmo to be landing in that lane if that seems like it's the only way that it's going to be able to beat you. If you do lose an on-reveal ability to Cosmo early on, just make sure you kind of move things over to different lanes. But this card is important to know how to play around. Make sure you're always checking initiative. If you are able to play with initiative, Cosmo cannot hurt you that turn. But if you are not on initiative, always think about, can my opponent play Cosmo? Am I telegraphing where I might play this turn, and how bad will this Cosmo affect me if it lands? All important things, and make sure to utilize that doggo well and be scared of it when you're not on the flip. Next up, we have Enchantress, which is a 4 energy, 4 power that's kind of the flip of Cosmo. It's a on reveal, remove the abilities from all ongoing cards at this location. A couple important things about Enchantress. You can play Enchantress kind of anytime, because you're going to delete those ongoing abilities that happen later. Sometimes ongoing abilities can help you during the turns, but realistically the ongoing ability is just to get higher power later on in the game. So definitely hold on to that Enchantress almost all the time until turn 6, because you're going to want to see if there's a higher priority target that comes down, especially because the two biggest targets that you're going to want to hit with Enchantress are Devil Dinosaur and Iron Man, which will both come down on turn 5. So if you're just pushing out Enchantress because maybe you see some smaller ongoing ability that you want to target, think about keeping it until turn 6, because it can be really, really impactful if you shut off one of those cards. Like I said, the meta that you're going to want to use this is if you're seeing a lot of Iron Men on the ladder. It can work well against Strong Guy. If you're playing like an aggressive Strong Guy deck, shutting off that Strong Guy can really surprise your opponent. Then you're kind of playing Enchantress as a 10-point swing, -6 from your opponent, and then the 4 you get from Enchantress itself. And if you're playing a lot of Devil Dinosaur decks or just running into Iron Man, Enchantress is definitely a great thing to fit in. Enchantress is a bit expensive for a tech card, so there's always that little bit of downside, but I think that it can be great to slot in. And then if you're ever seeing a hot location that's getting a lot of those ongoing cards, I'm seeing like Onslaught Citadel, Enchantress is a great add to your deck. If you are playing against an Enchantress possibly, and you're playing a Devil Dinosaur deck, or you're playing Iron Man, if you're seeing a lot of Enchantress on ladder, I would recommend maybe trying to play those cards on turn 6. It can really help you out. But again, kind of similar to Cosmo, if you have a huge Devil Dinosaur down, you have a big full hand, you're winning handedly, your opponent does that snap on turn 6, always think about, could they be dropping an Enchantress on this lane? And if they drop that Enchantress, am I going to win? Doesn't necessarily mean you should always retreat if you can't win against that Enchantress, but always kind of calculate it in your mind and see what you can do against it. The final card for Pool 1 is going to be Armor, a 2 energy, 3 power with ongoing. Cards at this location can't be destroyed. It's interesting that this is in Pool 1 because you're almost never going to really start seeing it as a tech card until Pool 2. Pool 2 makes the Destruction deck a lot more viable because you're getting access to the card Bucky Barnes, a 2 energy, 1 power that gets destroyed and turns into a 6 power Winter Soldier, one of the best flavor cards in the game. So when you get into Pool 2, you might want to start utilizing Armor if you are seeing a lot of those Destruction decks. If you're running Armor in your deck and you see a Bucky Barnes come down, try and play out the Armor as quickly as possible, because very often they're going to be destroying it that very next turn. But it is nice because Bucky Barnes only has 1 power, so often you are going to get that initiative. Once again, initiative is really important with Armor. If you are on initiative, you can stop a Destruction on that exact turn. If you're off initiative, maybe don't even think about playing Armor. If you're anticipating that your opponent's going to play a Destruction card right away, maybe it's worth it to just utilize that 3 power in another lane or try and snipe out a Nova later on. The other use for Armor in Pool 2 is if you're running into a lot of Killmonger decks and you want to protect some specific 1-drops. So there's some really powerful 1-drops that come in Pool 2, like Sunspot, which is a 1 energy, 1 power that grows with all of your unspent energy. If you're playing like an Infinite deck that really likes running Sunspot in it, Armor's probably a great inclusion. You're going to play that Sunspot on 1, hopefully get that Armor down on turns 2 or turn 3 to deny that Killmonger from your opponent. Your opponent's going to feel really juicy when they see that Sunspot go down if they are running Killmonger, and being able to block it is really great. Ways that you can play around Armor if you are a Destruction deck is just by destroying that Bucky Barnes as quickly as possible. Try not to be too noticeable where you're going to be playing those different cards like Nova or Bucky, and just always anticipating it. This is probably the rarest of these 3 and probably the least powerful of a tech card, but always smart to know if you're on initiative or not. And if you're not on initiative on that turn, you're going to blow up your Bucky Barnes. Think about maybe we should fight for initiative for next turn, see if that Armor comes down, and then once we have initiative, then we can blow up that Bucky Barnes and know that that Armor is not going to stop us. First up in Pool 2, we have the absolutely meta-defining card, Killmonger. A 3 energy, 3 power with on reveal, destroy all 1-cost cards. This is going to be the biggest change you're going to see moving up from Pool 1 to Pool 2. In Pool 1, there's Khazar Zoo decks. Any deck with Angel and a bunch of 1-drops are going to see tons of play, and for good reason. 1-drops are great. They're going to give you one of the best ratios of energy spent to power. However, once you get into Pool 2 and you start seeing Killmonger, it's going to completely wreck a lot of those game plans. How you're going to utilize Killmonger, I generally recommend to wait until later in the game to utilize it. If you see a juicy one drop that your opponent plays, you might want to try and play it right on turn 3. But in general, you're going to want to get as much juice out of this Killmonger as possible. So I definitely wait until turns 5 or turn 6. They could have a sunspot that they're investing into. They could have more one drops that you can kill later on. So definitely don't be super antsy with Killmonger and wait a little bit. If you're using this in your deck, I would probably run either no one drops or just Nova. Nova's a great thing to play alongside Killmonger. You play it out, you play the rest of your deck, and then when you drop that Killmonger in turn 5 or turn 6, it's going to poke it and give yourself a blue Marvel buff all the way across your board. One of the best combinations you can probably run once you unlock this card in Pool 2. On the defensive side and how to deal with Killmonger, you can utilize armor like I just talked about. So armor with 1 or 2 key 1-drops can be totally fine and kind of skirt you around Killmonger. And the other thing is just, anticipate on turn 5 or turn 6. Once you get into Pool 2, always be calculating what can happen if my opponent plays Killmonger. Think about if they have a Nova on their side of the board, what it can do. If you have a Nova on your side of the board and maybe you haven't been able to destroy it, what it's going to do on your side. Or if you have one or multiple 1-drops that are out there, how that Killmonger is going to affect the game. You don't always want to fully anticipate it, but if you do feel like you're playing a really aggressive 1-drop deck, you're way ahead and your opponent snaps on turn 5 or turn 6, it's probably a really good indicator that they're going to be dropping Killmonger on you. Make sure to take into account all the different possibilities of a Killmonger drop. Calculate if you have enough possibilities to win that game to make it worth it, and judge for yourself whether or not you should retreat in those later games when you have multiple 1-drops out in the field. Next up, we have one of my most adored cards in the whole game, Leech. A 5 energy, 3 power card with on reveal, remove the abilities from all cards in your opponent's hand. So this effect is incredibly powerful. If your opponent has a Devil Dinosaur, an Iron Man, an Onslaught, a Claw, a Blue Marvel, all these abilities are going to get decimated out of their hand, and their turn 6 is going to be much worse. Now, I love Leech. I have an adoration for Leech, but I don't think this card is very competitive, and there's a few reasons why. First of all, power-wise, it's just way too low. 5 energy for 3 power. There's just so many bigger things that you can be doing on turn 5 to improve your side of the board that just adding 3 power and disrupting your opponent's hand pretty significantly usually isn't going to be enough to win you games. Leech can also have downsides. If Washington DC is one of the locations, once those abilities are gone, the opponent can play them in Washington DC and still get a full power from them. If your opponent has the Infinite in their hand and they didn't skip turn 5, they can just play that now on turn 6 without having to skip a turn beforehand. So there are some cards that have downsides. If you look at Pool 3, there's cards like Typhoid Mary, Red Skull, where turning off their abilities is actually going to be really, really great for your opponent. I still think that Leech is fun to be run in metas where you're facing a lot of people who are holding back until turn 6 to make a big power play with super strong abilities. Sometimes Leech can be really great, but I probably cannot recommend running this if you're trying to be as competitive as possible, but once you unlock it, try and slot it into a couple of your decks for fun, because I think that it's one of the most fun cards in the whole game. Maybe not for your opponent, but at least for you when you get to play it. And finally, we have my most hated tech card in the game, Shang-Chi. A 4 energy, 3 power card with on reveal, destroy all enemy cards at this location that have 9 or more power. Shang-Chi is a incredibly strong card. Being able to destroy a 9 power card for 4 energy, even if you just get one card that's 9 power, this is going to end up being like a 12-point swing for you. You're going to gain 3, opponent's going to lose 9, and if you can ever get the Shang-Chi ability off, it's absolutely worth it to run in your decks. However, Shang-Chi can be pretty hard to do. A lot of decks are not going to get cards that are that big, and they're going to do just more smaller cards, and sometimes this card can just rot in your hand. Reasons why you'd be running Shang-Chi is if you get a featured location that's going to make cards a lot bigger. So think like Nidavellir, that's going to add 5 power to every card, Monsters Island, that's going to add a 9 power card to your opponent's side that you can destroy, or just anything that's going to make some cards bigger. Or if you're just seeing a lot of big decks, if your opponent's playing a lot of giant monsters on turns 5 and turn 6, and especially if you find yourself being kind of second to play on turns 5 and turn 6, Shang-Chi can be really great. You want to make sure that you're utilizing initiative. If you're playing Shang-Chi out when you have the initiative, it's only going to destroy the cards that your opponent has there. If you're not on initiative, you can sometimes snipe really big drops from your opponent. If it's turn 6, you're expecting your opponent to play a giant card somewhere, and you know that you have a Shang-Chi in your hand, you can just decimate it from your opponent. So really, really smart play there. How to play around Shang-Chi is really, really tough. You're only going to see this, at least in pool 3, around like 1 in 10 decks. It might be a bit more common in pool 2 when there's a smaller card pool, but Shang-Chi is really, really hard to play around. It's most often going to come down on turn 6, so always kind of anticipate when you're looking at what your opponent's going to do. If you have some giant monsters on a couple of different locations, you're destroying your opponent, they still snap on turn 6. Maybe think, hey, Shang-Chi is going to come down, maybe I want to retreat. They could be bluffing, which is really, really annoying as well. But trying to play around Shang-Chi, you can try and include armor in your decks. I don't think that it's worth it to play around this tech card, but always just worry and try and calculate what's going to happen on turn 6 if they play a Shang-Chi, and see if you can play some cards that will work well and beat Shang-Chi if they play it, as well as still be powerful against other plays. Thanks so much for watching. I really hoped you liked this look into tech videos. If there's anything about Marvel Snap that you want to hear more about, let me know in the comments below. Thanks out. Make sure to subscribe. Watch that one too.